This podcast is brought to you by the good people at Living with Hemophilia, the online hemophilia community brought to you by Bayer. Living with Hemophilia is the destination of choice for a plethora of useful info, like medical and non-medical tips, helpful advice, information on programs for all ages and stages, leadership opportunities and initiatives, sewing patterns, and videos, the best videos. And because it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Simply type in livingwithhemophilia.com into your search bar, and there you are. Thank you, Internet. Join Bayer's community of fellow hemophilia patients, caregivers, and advocates as they put the live in Living with Hemophilia. You can even like them on Facebook. That's even better because then you can use emojis on their Facebook page and receive all the latest updates. So check out Living with Hemophilia, and before you wish happy birthday to some friend from the 3rd grade or share a funny meme about cats and Mondays, head over to Facebook and like Bayer's Living with Hemophilia page. You'll be glad you did.
Summer is already nearing an end, and for many families, that means their kids are heading back to school or off to college. It's an exciting time. What if you aren't ready for college, or you don't feel like that's the right path for you? How do you go about finding a career that fits your life with a bleeding disorder, and how do you approach the challenges of applying and interviewing for those jobs? That's what we're going to discuss on this episode of the Ask the Expert podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bombardier, and welcome to episode 18, our career counselor episode of the podcast with special guest Don Molter. Our guest today works as a career counselor at the Indiana Hemophilia and Thrombosis Center in Indianapolis. He's one of only 3 career counselors that work specifically in the bleeding disorders community and has been helping families and young adults navigate challenges at school and at work for 13 years. Thank you, Don Molter, for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be a part of this.
What does your role look like as a career counselor, specifically working with people with bleeding disorders, and what really got you started in this field?
When I started, I was also working in schools as a guidance counselor, K-12 licensed counselor, and I've been doing that for about 13 years. Got tired of that and saw an application or an advertisement online for this job as a career counselor at a treatment center. And I got to look into that. I have no idea what that is or what it amounts to. Then once I got into it and understood a little more about it, it made sense where these kids need to use their head, not their body, in jobs. Mm-hmm. And it was something I wanted to do. So I just felt the need to do something that I could be passionate about. And I love working with kids with different kinds of disorders, whether it be through special education, physical, whatever. I like to work with the underdog, and that's what drove me here. And when I started, our head doctor at the time, when I asked what my job description was, she said, save souls. And that was it. And there was no job description. So I basically have taken and run with it and decided what I thought was most important. So the nice challenge is with another career counselor on board now, we can look at stuff together, and she might have a different way of doing something that I may have been doing incorrectly for a while. So that'll be nice.
Yeah. And so what does your day-to-day look like? What do you spend most of your time working on?
If you look at the year, it's more of a year-to-year thing because it kind of cycles. Typically from about late July till about the 1st of October, I go out, and I don't do this by myself. I get some of our social workers. We have 4 social workers at our treatment center, which is fantastic. I know most people have a part-time one, and that's it. But we'll go out, and we call it school orientation sessions. And we'll go out. We work with at least 200 students in our chapter or in our treatment center. And we'll go out and we'll talk to teachers, principals, nurses, and gym teachers, PE teachers, and just talk to them about what hemophilia and von Willebrand's, any bleeding disorder, what it is, what it's not. Dispel some myths. We tell them we're not here to scare you. We're here to basically calm you down and understand what a healthcare plan can do for your kids. And then later during the year, I will start working with the kids who have IEPs or Section 504 plans. And we'll go back for a second time and we'll work on that. And then as it goes through the year again, we'll start working with issues with schools, either having parents having problems with schools or schools having problems with the kids. Kids' grades are starting to sink. I'll go back and we'll meet and find out what the problem is and try to correct things. And then as it goes through the year, we do final IEPs before school ends, and then I start working with my seniors. to get them ready for college. And then over the summer, we're dealing with college visits. We're dealing with adults who need jobs that have already got out of school at one point or another. So it just kind of floats in and out. Last week, I worked with 16 students at their schools. I covered the entire state of Indiana, so that can be rough going up and down the roads for that many schools. This week, I'm doing about 8, and next week, I'll be doing around 12. So, yeah, it'd be great to have some time in the office to work with other things and call. But I'm basically swamped until the middle of September right now.
What do you find are some of the most common questions from teachers and school administrators about having a bleeding disorder and having a young individual at their school with a bleeding disorder?
They're really, if it's the first time, they're scared. They're scared about what's going to happen on the playground, and are they going to trip and fall, or what about getting bumped in the hallway? They just have misconceptions. And so I usually go in, and one of the first things I tell them is, this child is not going to die from any injury that another child would die from. I mean, it would be the same thing. If he gets hit by a bus or a car, you forget what he has, you just deal with it, and it's the same thing.
Right.
It's less of death and more on the pain and the time away from school when they have a bleed, that type of thing. So mainly calming them down and that. We're having less and less issues of schools kind of blowing it off. But it's really the question of I'm just not sure what it is, and I'm kind of scared how's it gonna affect me in my classroom.
Something that just popped into my head was also, Ryan White was in school in Indiana. He went through a lot of struggles. I'm sure that there's a little bit more knowledge about Ryan White in, say, Indiana compared to Colorado. Does that ever come up in discussions?
I bring it up quite a bit, and the sad part is, or the interesting part is, Ryan died in 1990. So that's 28 years ago. Most of our starting teachers now were never born when he lived, let alone when he died. It's kind of becoming, less of a question. They don't know anything about that. So I'll explain that, and how, now the medicine, the majority of it is completely synthetic. You're not going to have issues with that anymore. And so they're, quite surprised when that comes up. The one thing that's really cool in Indiana with that is the school that he last finished up with is still just as fired up about that and working in a positive way. They have a fundraiser, a Ryan White race. They do all kinds of stuff. They only have 1 or 2 kids with a bleeding disorder in their school, but they continue to do it even to this day. So
that's really awesome to hear. As you've done this for now 13 years, have the questions from parents as kids go back to school, have those changed over time, or are those kind of similar to when you started, but with, there's all these new treatments, prophylaxis is more common. Is it evolving?
It's evolving, but it's also staying the same at the same time, because I'm getting new patients all the time, new little kids that are scared. And so we start from scratch, but we're starting to develop a more systematic way of including everybody in the picture, paying it forward. And so a lot of our kids are now becoming more like teen mentors, and we'll have leadership weekends and things where the parents come to the event and those kind of activities. What's really fun is I feel like my job is to be not as much a career counselor as just give them appropriate advocacy skills for the parents. Don't go in and panic and, scream and holler and get mad. Just go in and say, I know you guys don't know what this is. Let's work at it together. And what feels good is when I have a parent that says, I think I got it this year. I don't need you to come in. I feel like we're moving along not only with the kids and the schools, but the parents as well, to help them understand what they need to say and how they need to say it.
Yeah, that's really great to see that there's that progress being made. At the end of the school year, you have all those seniors that are getting ready to graduate and then perhaps go to college or perhaps start a career. What kind of advice do you impart to those young adults as they kind of make these decisions about where their future is going?
We are starting this year a brand new program for students ages 13 to 19, and it's going to be boys and girls, men and women, with their parents. So we're going to have a retreat over the weekend where over the span of 7 years, we're going to change the curriculum, and we're going to teach the kids adulting skills, because we see as they get into their early 20s and they take over responsibilities for ordering their factor and dealing with insurance and making premiums and all this stuff, that they tend to blow it off and throw things in the corner, and the next thing you know, they lose their insurance. And so these are ways for us to work with these kids and not just say, okay, now you're an adult, go out and do it. They need to know why and how. And so if we can do that over several years, I start with my kids. We're lucky in Indiana to have a scholarship called the 21st Century Scholar. And it's a low income thing. It has nothing to do with bleeding disorders. But if they get that, they can get in-state tuition free. But it's only qualified during 7th and 8th grade years. So that's why I have to work with kids at a younger age and with the parents. And they may not qualify, but once they do, it can't be taken away. So say, please, if nothing else, just apply and just sit back and know. And if that's a motivation right there, that's important for them to know. You got a college education paid for. If you now you've got to do the work and make sure that you qualify for the school that you want. And then and several states have that kind of a program, different qualifications, but I work with several states with kids, and we find out what's available, and I can help from that direction too. But through high school, I try to work with building a solid resume that's going to show colleges, show scholarship searches, what this kid's made of. And I tell them to do 3 things every year. You need to do something that's social, something that's service, and something that's professional. You have to show well-roundedness. And I explain it's like the old stereotype college Greek person that goes into college and all they do is party. They forget to go to school, they forget to do what they're supposed to do, and they flunk out. That's too one-dimensional. The person who back in the 60s were the protesters and they forgot to go to school, they were too busy having a cause, they flunked out of school. And then you have the person that's only thinking about themselves as the professional and not thinking of others. Again, it's one-dimensional. So if you can show well-roundedness all 4 years, and I tell the kids, go to camp. That's an automatic service, and it's something that you can provide a long-term, 4 years, 7 years in camp, all these other activities. On top of that, do something fun, get out there and play sports, be in a club of some sort, but make a difference, and then find out what it is you want to do. Be able to answer the question, how do you know? And if you can't answer that, you didn't really go out and interview enough people about it to know what it's about.
This podcast is brought to you by the good people at Living with Hemophilia, the online community brought to you by Bayer. Living with Hemophilia is the destination of choice for a plethora of useful info like medical and non-medical tips, helpful advice, information on programs for all ages and stages, leadership opportunities and initiatives, sewing patterns, and videos, the best videos. And because it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Simply type livingwithhemophilia.com into your search bar and there you are. Thank you, Internet. Join Bayer's community of fellow hemophilia patients, caregivers, and advocates as they put the live in living with hemophilia. You can even like them on Facebook, and that's even better because then you can use emojis on their Facebook page and receive all the latest updates. So, check out Living with Hemophilia. And before you wish happy birthday to that friend from 3rd grade or share a funny meme about cats and Mondays, head over to Facebook and like Bayer's Living with Hemophilia page. You'll be glad you did.
And like all of these, we've been talking kind of in the aspect of applying to college, but what if college doesn't seem like the right fit for somebody? Like they don't have a clue what they want to do with the rest of their life. I feel like that's always a really challenging question to ask a 18-year-old to figure out. I know I'll just do a quick tangent to my story, but I honestly had no idea what I wanted to be. I went to college and I was like, I'll just do pre-med because I was comfortable being in hospital settings because I had a bleeding disorder. But now that I think about it, that wasn't a very good fit. So like, what do you suggest to like young adults that are super unclear, they don't know exactly what they want to do, and maybe college isn't even the right fit? Like, how do you talk to those kids, and like, what are your suggestions for them?
Okay, for those, what I'll do is I actually am licensed to do career and personality testing. And so I'll do that with my kids usually at the end of their freshman year. And we'll do that together. I do home visits with my parents and kids. I'll do them online. We'll go over those results, and then I will give them assignments. I literally would say, okay, the next time we get together or I talk to you on the phone, this is what I want you to do. And I will start having them do that. There are a couple of really, really neat programs out there for any state that could use, the social workers, whatever. If you tell your listeners I would recommend them look up any job title, get on a Google search, any search engine, put in nurse, and then right behind that, leave a space and put the letters BLS, and that stands for Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what they'll find is it will tell them everything they need to know about that career and all the different subcategories of nursing. It'll tell you what are some things that are maybe similar to nursing that you need to know about, like maybe a medical assistant or a nurse practitioner, whatever it might be. And they can do that with several jobs. Then what I do is I ask them to get on salary.com, which is also free. And they can look up that same job and they can look at it locally, statewide, and nationally to see how much money there is. So, for example, if you've got someone who wants to be a doctor, they want to be a hematologist in a treatment center, and they live in a state that doesn't have a treatment center, that's something that we need to talk about because you're going to have to move. And are you willing to do that? If they say no, then let's look at something that you might be able to do. Could just a regular doctor? Could you be into nursing or PA or whatever it might be? So I ask them a lot of questions. This is what I want you to do. I want you to research it and call me back. And with the parents there too, I say, these are some things you can do to help them, and it'll help you understand what they have to go through to do that as well. And then I tell them, this is the stuff on that 3 things I said on their resume. What do you do professionally? I do shadowing. I look up things. I call people. That's what's going to help answer that question for an essay.
I love that, thinking about just asking questions, asking a lot of questions, because I think you start to drill down into the actual aspects of what somebody is actually excited about. There's so many other careers out there too that I think we just put them into these big buckets of like a nurse, a doctor, but there's so many other career options that I never knew about until I got older.
We like to call them clusters. And so you have a medical cluster, a service, a managerial, educational, or that type of thing. And you look at the extremes. At one end, if you're medical, you could be a neurosurgeon. The other side is a candy striper. And you got everything in between. And through the career testing and interviewing, you shrink that. And you look at it based on, maybe I don't want to do a whole lot of math or a whole lot of science. Well, we might look at nursing. We may look at MA. We may look at CNA. We shrink it in based on your interests. And on the personality and career tests that I give, I tell students it's like most people think in terms of I want to be a doctor, but I can't stand the sight of blood, but I'll do it anyway because the money's good. That's very silly logic, but we all do it. I'm going to go to XYZ college because my buddies are going to go there. Well, what are you going to major in? I don't know. I used to, when I was a high school counselor, I got really frustrated with hearing these athletes that would, not just because they're athletes, but we go to senior night or for these different athletic things, and they'd announce, so-and-so is going to be going to this private school, and he's unsure of a major. Well, shoot, why pay that money and go to a private school when you don't have a clue? That's a lot of pressure. Let's find out more first. So that's why I started, like I said, 7th and 8th grade, so that it's not a surprise. And I tell them it's great. What you go into is something you probably already know. You just need more validation based on doing some of these things first. What I would do with them is, as we're going through school, again, if we know about freshman, sophomore year, most schools have a vocational type program that starts junior and senior year. My son did that, and he's starting to get his master's this year. It has nothing to do with not going on to college, but it can be a choice away from college as well. But when I work with those students and they say, I just want to hurry up and get through school, it's not something I like, I want to go to work right away, I kind of work on that assumption that you need some of that. You need some real world experience. We have many women, young girls in school that will go to cosmetology school. The high school pays for it. They take their state licensing test in August after they graduate. And if they go to college, they've got a great backup to make money. If they don't choose to go to college, they've got a skill, and they can go out and get a job that way. So that could be with, auto mechanics. One thing that's kind of a misnomer, I guess, auto mechanics, everyone thinks, oh, no, they're going to bleed because of that. No, everything's electronic, it's computerized, they have lifts. they don't really get hurt that much. I mean, obviously some will, but there's ways to find everything, and we can look at that. Even kids who might have special needs to the point of a cognitive disability, they are not going to graduate with a diploma. They're going to get a certificate of completion. We can work on some programs on that for them so they can work through different fields. One thing that's out there that all students need to be aware of, and adults too, is there's a program called Vocational Rehabilitative Services, and it's in every state of the union. It's 80% state funded, 20% federal. And it was a program that was established in the early 1920s, right after the First World War. All of our soldiers came back and they were shell shocked. They had amputations. They were, just a mess, blind, deaf, whatever it might have been. And the government said, wow, what do we do with these guys? We have no program. So just like the name says in reverse, rehabilitate them into a vocation. That's what Voc Rehab is about. It's a work program. And so when you ever hear on the news that this last month, job growth was so many 100,000 people, that's a program that they do statistics on the people that they can help find jobs. And the neat thing with that is you can do it right out of high school. Going with a senior this next week, where we're going to go in. He hasn't graduated yet, but we're going to definitely go Voc Rehab because he's not going to have the ability to go on to college and doesn't want to. And that's okay. But we're going to work with them, and they will start immediately after he gets out of high school. And that's when the program starts. And this is also for older patients of ours who, men that have been in very industrial jobs, they're tearing up their joints, they just can't do it anymore. We can go in and help get them changed into another direction. And they help with three ways. They can either help you get a job, help you go back to school, get some training for a new job, or they can actually help you start a business. That's a neat program. They can go up to $45,000 in startup costs, and it's vouchers. Wow. So $30,000 one year, $15,000 the next. You don't have to take all of that, but it's very good. And but they won't do kids out of high school. You've got to be about 23 or 24. You've got to try some stuff first and then come in. And these are for kids who might have inhibitors where they just are not going to be able to stay on a job. They're going to cost the company too much. They're going to get fired, all kinds of different scenarios. It's a great way if we can come up with something that would be great for them. And we're not talking capital letters, your own business. It's just something, it could be anything, mowing yards. It can be selling stuff on eBay. It could be all kinds of different things, and you can do it when you're on disability as well.
Do they do some business model training and some training around how to run a business too?
They do all that. That's part of it. And what they would do is they'd have you go to a retired business person's organization, and they would help you do a business plan. And they would have you go to a few night sessions of how to do taxes for your own company, how to run things, whatever, how to get into the red versus the black, that kind of deal. But it's a great program. It's long. And I know here in Indiana, I've had no one turn down. The only people that have not gotten it are the ones that just weren't ready to start a business and didn't want to work for it, because it's paper intensive. You've got to have a business mind to want to do it. So it could take 8 months to a year to actually get something set up. And it's more in depth than we could ever do right now for a conversation, but every state has this, and they have different approaches to it. But it's all based on paying it forward and getting you to be a tax-paying, individual. You're back in the workforce is what they're looking for.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that there are all these programs out there that every state has. That's really great. And it also sounds like you have a very individual focus when you're trying to help people navigate college or jobs. You really look at that one person and see what's best fit for them, which I think is a really, really cool approach to this, because, there's so many jobs out there, and finding one that you actually like and a career that you enjoy is super important, I believe. So that's really great to see.
One thing that's really changing now is, before we would tell our patients, there's no way you can get into a police job. You cannot be in a police department. You won't pass the physical. Well, we've had to eat crow on that, because we now have 3 of our patients that are police officers in Indiana. And so we tell them their stories to students to explain this is how they did it. They had to go the back route They're not on the state police. They're on either a county sheriff's office or a municipal or town, but how that works. So that's changed. The one thing we can still say you cannot get into is the military, no matter what. However, in the future, that may change, but for right now, it's not possible whatsoever.
I've heard also of a few people with a bleeding disorder becoming firefighters in other states. So I think that's interesting too.
Things are always moving. You just don't know. Never say never, but you can at least say it's not right now. It could be in the future.
Yeah. Say that you're in the interview process for a job. When do you need to tell your employer that you have a bleeding disorder, or do you even have to disclose that you have any sort of medical condition to your employers? And like, what are your rights around that?
Right. That's a very good question. In fact, I'm just dealing with that with a kid who got fired just within the last couple of days, and we're dealing with that same issue. You do not have to tell them at all. It is illegal for them, a company, to do that. What happened with him, he was severe, and the company just kind of figured out that the person that had a lot of bills coming in, they kind of figured out who it was and what they had, and he just, kind of disappeared. You're just not going to be here with us. We're going in a different direction. That's how they put it. You don't have to tell them, and I wouldn't, because that gives them an automatic reason to not place you. So, and it's illegal for them to ask. If it ever comes up, we do have one patient of ours who actually talked to the company and said, I know I'm going to cost a lot when they found out, but is there a way that we could set up an insurance plan just for me? So it doesn't affect other people in the company. They're not going to, lose their benefits. You're not going to raise their rates. It's just strictly with me. And they did. And that was great. But again, he didn't let them know until they started to find out that something was up. With a folk rehab, starting a business, if you, especially like an inhibitor, you're going to have a hard time staying on the job. You can get on the marketplace, make as much money as you want as a private, employer, I guess, of your own. You can hire people when you have your own business and have your own insurance company as well. So that's a way a lot of our kids have been able to move away from that.
So say you are in an interview and a question comes up about medical conditions, or if they're like hinting that they're trying to ask about medical conditions or something like that. How do you approach that in a job interview?
You've got to kind of read the person talking to you. And it may be something where, I just feel like that's a personal question that is not relevant for this job right now. Or if they say, well, no, it is, because you're going to be lifting 100-pound, whatever items daily, 8-10 hours a day, and you're going to bend your feet. That's when you might say, maybe this job's not for me. Ask them a question in return. Why do you ask? How is that necessary? And then if they explain themselves, then that might be when you bow out and say, this is going to, I see the writing on the wall here. That's not an employer you want to work with, because they're going to hunt you down.
Throughout this whole discussion, I've been kind of thinking about, my past experience, but I've only had like 2 job interviews my whole life. So, and they were with one was with a hemophilia research lab. So like they kind of already knew. Kind of following up, you said you had to have an instance where somebody potentially is losing their job because of their bleeding disorder. Is that legal, that they can fire you because of a medical condition?
No, it's not legal, but they can come around it. And that's what they're in. Actually, I've had 2 in the last year, and they both pretty much were told the same thing, that we're just going in a different direction, and it's best if this be your last day. There's no way we can prove it, because there is a Section 504 that can go into the employment arena as well. And you can go through the Federal Office of Civil Rights and put a case. But if you don't have proof, if you got it working for a big company, chances are they've got a very well-oiled machine of a legal team, and they've heard that before, and they're ready for anything. And so you may win, you may not win, but even if you win, you really want to work there knowing that they're going to hunt you down, and if you're 5 minutes late, that's going to give them the reason to quit. They will find some other reason. It's basically no fault hiring and firing, basically. They can do it if they have a reason, and they can make up a reason, but full well you've just come off of maybe a month of being in the hospital, some rehab, all this stuff, and then you get called in. You can kind of put the X's and O's together and know where you stand and how they probably figured it out.
I guess this is kind of probably along the same lines, but in our bleeding disorder community, we obviously have a slightly older demographic that also has HIV and hepatitis C as things to think about. So is that the same kind of questions, you think?
Yes, it's not legal. And in fact, I have one guy with HIV that's about to lose his job because he was working at home. So anytime he had a bleed, he would just go and work at home for a few days. Well, they had a new president or CEO of the company come in and said, no more working at home. And because of that, now he's going to start having to miss days where before he didn't. And we may have to go in and talk to him, but we're just not sure if we want to bring that out. And he does have, the full 3 H's, HIV, hemophilia, and Hep C. He's got all 3. We're working on the Hep C, but that's something that, is reality for him. I also have another guy that's going to do FMLA, and we don't have to submit HIV because that's not what's keeping him from missing work. It's the hemophilia. And you just talk to your doctor when they fill out the forms and say, I only want this disclosed. And that's your right.
Okay. In the bleeding disorder community, we also kind of live in this unique space where some people in our community can find employment with the specialty pharmacies or other organizations within the community. And many people view it as a way to be able to continue to connect and give back to their community. What are your thoughts about this and just suggestions for questions to ask when you might be approached by one of these companies?
Right. And that's a hard one for me because I do work for a treatment center. So that's competition. But there can be a place for that if you're qualified. If you're not a qualified person and you're being hired mainly for the use of your factor, that's something to question, the morality or the ethics involved in that. But if you have a college degree, they're hiring you because they need someone, that's perfectly okay, or even a high school degree. But if you're a high school dropout and you're paid to fold envelopes and do whatever, that's something that's, we got to look at that. I don't think we see that as much as we used to. Back in the early, 2000s, 90s, the 2000s, I think that was more of an issue. But it's just really look at, are they looking at for me as an employee, or are they using me to get, finances? Make sure that that's, understood, because they do know that you have hemophilia. So is there that hidden motive, or is it legit? That's something that they need to kind of keep in the back of their mind. How am I being treated? Am I cattle? Am I a true trusted employee and valued?
So is there like a written job description about like what you're actually going to be doing and like actual like job tasks? Is that like something that you should be asking questions about and like digging into?
I want to know my job description, and I want to know what did you see about my resume that impressed you? And if it really wasn't anything, it was the fact that you had hemophilia and you could relate to our patients and all that. That's a little scary, because as soon as you work for a company like that and maybe you lose a couple patients to a different company or to the treatment center, then you get fired or laid off because you've lost all that money. Then that's an inappropriate use of an employee.
I think in a lot of instances it works really well for people, but I also know that there's those situations that it doesn't. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Just got to look at the states that you're in. Some of them, it has to be that way, if there is no treatment center. So it's just, you have to look at it for your own area.
So what do you do if you don't have a career counselor available? Like, where should people start when approaching all of these things? Are there resources out there?
There can be in small community colleges, even universities. If you go to a dean of students office or a placement service, a lot of times you can get the testing and career stuff available there. A lot of colleges that have high school guidance counselor graduate programs, those students have to have so many hours of free service to get their license. I had to do that. And that's a great way, because you're looked through, two-way mirrors or whatever, but you're supervised. They're not going to give you bad advice. No one died from getting wrong career advice. So, going with someone who's in training is perfect. We have what's called Partners. It's a nationwide program for training new staff members from different treatment centers. Long story on how that works, but you talk to your local social worker, they can give you information about that. But at those meetings, I speak at one every other month. I always tell the people there that if you have any kids that need assistance, give me a call. I'd rather them call me than the families, because then it could get out of control. But if I could have social workers give me a call and we can work on one of your tough situations, and I just talked to someone this morning from Missouri. So far this year, I've worked with California and Florida along with that. So that's not a problem. We have a service that no one has. We're willing to share, to a point. Some of your tougher cases we'd be more than happy to work with. We could get into a whole nother thing on scholarships. That could be another thing entirely, because there's a lot of stuff we need to do with that. A lot of scholarships out there, a lot of money that's untapped, different sites that need to be looked at that are free, that you can get a lot of information from.
I really appreciate you sharing a lot of your knowledge with us. Any last thoughts?
One thing I'd say is, this is more for the parents. If you have a son or daughter that's just not ready for college, don't push it. I found that a lot of our kids seem to do better when they go at maybe age 20 or even 21. They have to deal with mortality issues at a much earlier rate. There's lots of issues. There's lots of breaking, apron strings, all kinds of different issues that come into it. You might find if there's a local junior college that they could start out with, either part-time or even full-time, that will transfer credits to a bigger school later on. It's cheaper, and it allows them to still go and not lose any skills that they had in studying along the way. And then another one that's really big is do not go to for-profit colleges. They are not federally funded, so they don't have to do any accommodations whatsoever. And they are closing right and left. National ones would be like University of Phoenix, things of that nature. They're starting to close down schools because their credits do not transfer anywhere. You're done with an associate's. That's it. There's nothing else for you. You start over. And there's so many students that will go in and get signed up before I have a chance to talk to them, and we have to pull them out because they're way more expensive than even a junior college would be, and you just don't need to be a part of that.
That's some really, really great advice. And I really appreciate the not pushing college if it's not the right time. I think that's really awesome to leave our listeners with. Once again, thank you so much, Don, for joining us today on the Ask the Expert podcast. I think it was super informative. And the last thing would be that if you don't have a career counselor at your treatment center, to look for your social worker, and hopefully they can help you navigate a lot of this as well. So thank you again, Don, for being on the episode.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Have you checked out Living with Hemophilia yet? If you have, kudos to you. Not only are you eager to join this exciting community of discourse and helpful information, you're also a keen listener and patron of the arts. But if you haven't taken a swim through livingwithhemophilia.com, take a moment to pull it up on the old internet. I think you're going to love it. Helpful content, relevant updates, and most of all, a bunch of people going through the same things you are. It's a growing part of the online Living with Hemophilia community brought together by the good people at Bayer. Also, put it on your Facebook to-do list. Hit the like button on Living with Hemophilia's Facebook page. It's a good alternative to looking at the slideshow of your neighbor's recent foot surgery. I mean, unless you're into that sort of thing. Living with Hemophilia from Bayer. Check it out.
And that is all for the Ask the Expert podcast. We'll be back next month with another expert interview. BloodstreamMedia.com is your one-stop shop for all of Bloodstream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community. Once on BloodstreamMedia.com, don't forget to follow the links to subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast, Ask the Expert podcast, Powering Through podcast, and the Bloodline podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Have a question you would like to hear an expert answer to? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You also find Bloodstream Media on Facebook at facebook.com/Bloodstream Media and on Twitter at Bloodstream Info. This episode of Ask the Expert was written by Chris Bombardier, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Rob Bradford, Joshua Sterling Bragg, Alva Friedman, and Colby Crow. Artwork by Ryan Geelan and Katie Wright Mead, and the Ask the Expert pod is edited by Allison Stoney. I'm your host, Chris Bombardier, and until next time, keep on climbing.